welcome back to the Jess and John pod. I am Jess.
And I am John. Hello, Nash.
This is a news talk show about the class divide. And before this, John was a journalist, is a journalist, and John's work mainly focused on how the class divide shows up in our politics in America. And my work was focused on how the class divide shows up in the economics of America. And us coming together and talking about the news has been really fun for us and really rewarding. We're happy that you all are listening along. If you like the show, make sure you like it, rate it, share it out. It's really important for the algorithm so we can reach some more people who, you know, can understand the news in a different way than corporate America would like you to receive it. And we think that's beautiful here at the Jess and John podcast.
It's a beautiful thing. It costs you nothing, smash like and subscribe. Hit the group chat, hit the family group chat with it. If you need your uncle to listen to some stuff about the class divide in economics and politics, go ahead and just send it along. It helps us immensely, costs you nothing.
We've got a really good show for you today. We're going to talk to Jose Olivares at the end. Jose is someone I've worked with at Dropsite News. He is an investigative journalist who has been on the beat of the El Salvador prison, but also the development of the prison in Guantanamo Bay since before Trump was president. That was a project that started under Biden. He was responsible for the reporting on that Dropsite put out this past fall. And if you've seen the photos of the prison that the Trump administration is sending folks to, you know that this is a very timely interview, and we're happy to bring an expert in to talk about it because, I don't know, I feel like you can't pay attention to everything with all the tariffs that have been put in place, with what's happening in Gaza. It feels like there's so much all at once. So we're lucky that we have friends of the show like Jose to come in and break it down. Look forward to that. We're going to talk about the tech monopolies in America, Meta and Google. There's some landmark FTC cases that are being decided on now. There's violence at the Pennsylvania governor's mansion.
Whoa.
We're going to talk about that. And we've got a couple new promising candidates getting into the race for U.S. Senate. So we're going to talk about all of that. First, John, you want to tell us about the deportation hell going down in America?
Man, yes, I do. This has been sticking around my old brain here in the last week of this crazy onslaught of news, the news roller coaster that we're on and we can't really get off. But, I just think about what is happening right now and how important it is to take stock of what's happening and what it means for all of you listening out there or watching, for anybody walking around really, because we have Kilmar Abrego Garcia. This is a Maryland dad. He has no criminal record. He was deported by the Trump administration. They admitted that it was a mistake, and yet they are still just letting him rot in El Salvador, right? Openly denying orders by the Supreme Court, a conservative court at that. We've probably heard this by now. But what really gets me is the control that the people in this administration have. You've got characters like Sebastian Gorka. One of my favorite things to do on the podcast is to mention the creepy weirdos controlling all of our lives by name, so you can give these people a Google. We talked about Curtis Yarvin in the last episode. Now, with this news surrounding the people being sent to El Salvador, I think it's worth looking into Sebastian Gorka. So give that guy a Google. He is the counterterrorism czar who was out there trying to paint this Maryland father that they mistakenly deported, a person with no criminal record, as a terrorist after the fact to justify the actions that they're taking. And this is how the disappearance pipeline really works. You label somebody a threat and you can just send them off into a foreign prison, right? And increasingly, this is getting closer and closer to American citizens. They label you an out group. They send you over there. There's no due process. There's no appeal. You're just kind of vanished. And the scary part about that is that all of this post 9/11 surveillance machine that we're just living under kind of subconsciously. That's, tracking your text, your location, your metadata, um, who you're hanging out with, how many degrees of separation you are from someone taking much more radical actions than you. All of that has been running in the background, has been growing in the years since Edward Snowden really revealed the massive extent to which it is present in all of our lives. That was 11 years ago. And this thing has just been running and growing in the background. And now that surveillance state, it's in the hands of people who see protest signs and, leftist group chats of your friends as national security threats. That's what's really been on my mind with this Kilmar Abrego Garcia case. And I think it's really important to remember in this moment that this is not politics as usual. It is the not so quiet spread of fascism, really. And it's important how we respond to it because now is the time for bold candidates, for bold organizing. If we are not going that way in the political response to these people in charge of all of this, I think that's a losing position to start with. We really need to match the energy of these people, to go bold, to stick with really bold candidates who are running for office, and it's a moment that is as good as any to just update your own personal politics to match the moment. That's one of the things that's been sticking in my mind as we watch this all unfold. And there are things that you can do to start with. I'm always trying to plug the group chat that we have going on here in Wheeling, West Virginia. What we did there was we moved the friend group onto Signal, the same encrypted app that the Trump administration and all their weirdos are trying to use to evade matters of public record. You can also use that in your organizing. It's a step towards digital safety that doesn't cost you anything. It's secure. It's simple. You can start with a handful of friends, make a group, grow from there, and don't even stop. And that is on my mind as we're watching this administration ignore court orders and disappear people who say things that they do not like. So that's what's been on my mind. Jessica, with all this deportation hell, thank you for opening that up to me to pop off about.
Yeah, when we talk about this, John refers to the Stephen Dosinger interview a lot. And I think that is a really good one to see how the security state is used against American citizens who stand up to corporate power globally, right? Stephen Dosinger's case was based in Latin America and it in the Amazon, literally protecting the lungs of the globe, suing fossil fuel giants, and then they privately prosecute him at home. He's on an ankle monitor. He had a lot to say in that interview about the security state in America, so it's a good listen. Yeah, if you haven't listened to that one, go back to it. But personally, it's weird being a journalist now because I just saw that there's a threat of use of lie detectors to assess who in the Department of Defense is leaking to journalists. And thankfully, my DoD contact has not leaked to me, any documentation that is protected by the DoD or whatever. But I had this sinking feeling of like, oh my gosh, this person that I have a relationship with could be the target of the fascist government because I'm just doing my job. And he's doing his job as well to ensure that we have a good government that is held accountable. And so, this idea that, like, the people that have been preaching free speech, free speech, free speech are the ones that are now attacking it, it's crazy to me. Like, where are these people that were saying we need the Second Amendment because maybe we will need to form a militia because our government gets too powerful and is overstepping? Like, what are they doing these days? I'm not saying that's what we have to do, but like, what?
There
Don't
was a
you?
lot of people who were saying that, and they're suspiciously quiet now. So,
Yeah.
what's
What
up with
are,
that?
what are we doing, folks? We're not
What are we
getting
doing out
together
there?
talking about where the line is because I think this is the time to like get your community together and just have an honest conversation. Where is the line for us? Like, what happens if they come for one of our neighbors? What's the move? What are we doing? How are we treating ICE agents if they come into our neighborhood and go after our fellow Americans, honestly? Um, it's crazy. And so I just feel like Luigi Mangione was a big moment because we got to see how many people feel very radical feelings and do see violence as maybe the only plausible solution for change. Elon Musk was on X saying civil war is inevitable. So this is not like something that should be too taboo to talk about. But I can't tell you how many people I meet who are either in high places in the corporate world or are just regular working class people that talk about how close we are in America to a revolution, to a civil war over class divide and over these crazy political fights that people get so invested in that are based a lot of the times on fake news or religious reasons. They feel Christians are oppressed in America and they feel that there is this tyranny of the woke mob of, oh, they're going to make us all be in the bathroom with transgender people and they're going to play in schools and they're changing our society too much by, giving women power and shit. There are some people that are like terribly racist and all of that stuff, but I think the vast majority of the people that are like ready to rumble at the end of the day are sick of the class divide in our country. And so I'll say, I'm not going to name names, but you will be surprised who has said it's time for the capitalist order to end. And I'm ready for the revolution, just waiting. And I'll be on the front lines. Like the most normie people you'd ever expect have said this to me.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I travel so I freelance for More Perfect Union, and that puts me into a lot of different pockets of the country. And you know what? There's so many things that are crazy about this political moment, but one of them is just that look at how the sides are breaking down here. Like in my view, you have the United States government that has fallen into the hands of just a bunch of weirdo creeps who in so many words are saying that we want 1,000 of the most fantastically rich people on earth to run things totally. You can't say that publicly, so it comes out in a bunch of ways that make you look at what they're saying and say, like, how the hell did these people get to be in charge of our country? And then on the other side, you have, what I would describe as the majority of the country who's just like, hey, can we get health care, please? I'm tired of, if you're paying on the marketplace like I am, $400 a month for a plan that has a $9,000 deductible. There are a lot of people who are looking around and saying like, hey, here's a perfect example. You might notice if you're watching to this program rather than listening, the dope T-shirt that I have on right now. It is from the Ohio Valley Speedway dirt track down in Parkersburg, West Virginia, where I just went to shoot a piece. And um, now I'm talking about my dirt track shirt and completely lost my train of thought. But it's about how most people out there are just wanting the basics from our government. Healthcare, wages, um, reining in corporations that have like crept in to influence absolutely every part of our life. And yet they're running up against this government that is controlled by all these crazy people who now have their hands like firmly on the levers of the security state and are turning that against people who are just like, hey, can we have healthcare, please? And so on the one hand, it's like, we have to be concerned about the direction and safety while we're advocating for these things. And on the other hand, it's like, hey, we're not asking for crazy stuff here. And there are a lot of people who are showing up to political rallies who are saying, just let working class people have a chance to run their own government. That's we're not asking for a lot here, but when we're asking for those things, it pays to be safe. I always say get the homies on Signal. I have not regretted doing that in my own small community. And as we're fighting for that great slice of pie in the sky, be safe while you're doing it, right? We got some weirdos out there controlling the government.
Yeah, it's an interesting feeling. I always thought like the descent into fascism would be scarier, but it's almost like annoying. I'm like,
Yeah.
God, these idiots. Like, we could all have such nice things. Why are you doing this? It doesn't feel like, oh no, they're gonna get me. It feels like, God, you fucking assholes.
Yeah, like
Come on,
dangerous
man.
idiots. Dangerous idiots is what we're dealing with here.
Mm-hmm.
And you must be safe in the course of dealing with dangerous idiots
Yeah.
because they'll
And it's,
disappear you.
I don't think it's that they're incompetent and that's what's producing bad outcomes, which is what I think a lot of like MSNBC coverage and CNN coverage is right now of Donald Trump, is that, oh, he's so stupid, Elon's so stupid, this is the least prepared cabinet. They are doing exactly what they intend to do. They have clear plans, and we cannot mistake stupid or evil for stupid, which is really what they're doing. Like, these guys are evil. They probably are crashing the economy on purpose so their buddies can make a bunch of money. They probably are changing the global order of trade and don't care if hundreds of thousands of people die of hunger. They're not getting rid of social programs as an accident because they didn't know people were using them and they really thought it was all fraud. They know it's not fraud. They know exactly what they're doing. Do not mistake evil for stupid. Speaking of which, there's
Sage advice for 2025.
yeah, there's Linda Khan with the FTC was doing a great job, and then unfortunately didn't get to finish the job, and now we've got the Trump administration in power. But some of these cases are being heard before a judge that were initiated by Linda Khan, and so Google. You may have heard of the initial Google like antitrust case that was decided. They were deemed a monopoly in that case. They were like paying to be the default search engine on your phones and such. This is a little bit different in that it's about advertising. So, this is not my story. This is the New York Times. I'm going to read what they've reported today. So, Judge Leonie Brinkema, or Brinkema maybe, of the U.S. District Court for the Eastern District of Virginia said in an 11, or sorry, 115, not 1100, 115 page ruling that Google had broken the law to build its dominance over the largely invisible system of technology that places advertisements on pages across the web. The Justice Department and a group of states had sued Google, arguing that its monopoly in ad technology allowed the company to charge higher prices and take a bigger portion of each sale. Quote, in addition to depriving rivals of the ability to compete, the exclusionary conduct substantially harmed Google's publisher customers, the competitive process, and ultimately consumers of information on the open web. That is what the judge said. And so, this is a big deal.
It is a big deal. It's not often that you see the largest corporations on earth hauled before court to talk about how much control they have over our lives and especially their business practices. We are told all the time that, oh my gosh, this country would be so much better if we just ran things like a business. Well, how are our biggest businesses run? They're not, nowadays they're not making gains by what they say they're making gains from innovation, um, creating a better, widget. In the case of Facebook, it's just buying up your competition, which is what happened with Instagram and WhatsApp, two of the things that have come to light in the Meta trial. But the fact that two of the biggest tech companies with all of their influence are in front of the government right now, being grilled over their anti-competitive practices, those things don't just happen. These antitrust cases, and this is kind of my political lens on this, and I think we all the listeners out there need to remember, um, as a part of selecting the next wave of candidates, right? When candidates are coming before you, they're laying out their vision. What is their vision for holding these corporations accountable? You need to look for the kind of things that those candidates support, which are the reason why these tech companies are in court today. And these antitrust cases against Google and Meta, they started under Trump, the first administration, but they only got their teeth when President Biden appointed Lena Khan, who is a real deal trust buster, to head the FTC. And it was under her leadership that these cases that were initially tossed out by a judge got rewritten, refiled, and are now finally seeing their day in court. This is not just policy, it's who these candidates are putting in to actually, um, make it real, to break up the corporate influence of these companies, right? And that matters who these candidates are putting in charge of our antitrust infrastructure. So for me, that's the floor. Hiring people like Lena Khan, who are going to legitimately file cases that can challenge the control that all of these monopolies in every single industry have over our lives. So, any candidate that is claiming to be tough on corporations should be running, centering, bold anti-monopoly, anti-corporate legislation, and backing it up by putting fighters like Lena Khan in charge of those agencies, because that's the only reason why these companies are seeing a day in court. It's already a bipartisan issue, and voters across the board hate corporate consolidation. I mean, who likes uh, the internet companies, the healthcare companies that just keep getting bigger and bigger and bigger and less accountable? We've all had to, take our concerns with whatever company to a chat bot that just puts us in an endless loop of customer service that never really happens. To address that, you need candidates running with a clear policy against consolidation, against these huge monopolies who are appointing people like Lena Khan. And we should be looking for brawlers, not just brand consultants that are very friendly with these corporations and with the massive bags of cash that they bring into elections. So when we're looking for candidates to oppose this, that's one of the good areas to look for. Are they going to make anti-corporation, anti-consolidation policy real by centering that in their campaigns and appointing people like Lena Khan?
The last thing I'll say about this is with Google, the reason that they are able to have the monopoly power they have, similarly with Facebook, one of the first social media companies, similarly with the PayPal mafia, the first people to use the internet for finance. The internet is this wild west, and a big part of who is successful in the internet is who got there first. And imagine if we were to use that logic for like their outsized power on the internet anywhere else. If we were to say, "Oh, that guy got to all of the oxygen tanks first in the hospital during a crisis. So I guess he gets to distribute them and use them for himself and sell them out to people and charge whatever he wants." Like in any other situation, the first guy who discovered a lake in the desert and he says, "This is my lake because I got here first." All of the thirsty people in the area are going to be like, "Dude, you're crazy. Just because you got here first doesn't mean you get to decide how we as a society, as human beings, distribute and use resources." That would be ridiculous if we use the logic of whoever gets there first. That's child's play. That's like the rules of playground games. That is not how we organize an economy or a society. And so taking the logic in America and just saying, okay, if we were to apply this argument anywhere else that we just implicitly accept, what would it look like? Almost always, it's just insane. Um, so that's what I'll say about the tech monopolies.
Yeah, and by that same logic, it's like, what should we also just let whoever shows up with the biggest bag of money control access to resources that we all need to live like a nice, convenient, healthy, modern life? No, nobody thinks that, and yet that is how it operates. And these things are known about our system. I mean, we have been running with full throttle, wide open breaks off capitalism for a long time, and it's creating all kinds of things that are not so convenient to have in your life anymore. There was a time when it kind of produced wild innovations and made relative gains in social progress. Certainly, you could make these arguments, right? But it's a system that is that has as a feature, once it gets to a certain stage of growth, it starts to eat its own tail, right? And we are in that right now, which is why it's so important to have, candidates who actually have a plan to prevent that from happening. Because if we let that go on, the logical conclusion is whoever shows up to the lake or the oxygen tanks gets to sell them back to you, right? And nobody wants that. It doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, we have one of those economies in America where if you think about how things work for more than 5 minutes,
It's like,
it's
what the hell is
horrible.
this?
Yeah. If a mechanic were to look under the hood, they would whistle. They'd be like, "Phew,
They're like,
this is."
whoa, there's your problem. You got a bunch of greedy billionaires under the hood here. There's your problem. I know
um.
what's wrong with it. It's got a
All
bunch of
right.
greedy billionaires in it.
Oh, I see the problem. Ain't got no gas in it.
It's
You know
full of
that.
it's full of Peter Thiels.
I love the TikToks where they take the deer hooves and they're like, "Oh, the problem here is," and then they're pointing anyway. It's guys who I don't know why they do that, why they're playing with deer carcasses, but that's my For You page. Let's talk about what happened in the Pennsylvania governor's mansion.
I'll let that
So,
one go and go right on to the PA governor's mansion.
when I heard there was a fire at the PA governor's mansion and it was arson, my brain for some reason didn't think that's Josh Shapiro's house. I was just like, oh no, Luigi Mangione 3.0? What is this? But then I was like, oh shit, that's Josh Shapiro's house. What was this over? What was their motives? Do they have a manifesto? We don't know much yet. But he did give a speech saying violence is very bad. Please don't do violence to my family, the typical stuff, which is a weird thing to say as a man who autographed a bomb that was going to be used by Israel. It feels hypocritical that you don't think violence is the answer when it's used against you, but you're very proud of violence perpetrated against a mass of people. And I don't know if you saw this, but Bill Burr had a stand up recently, and I'll get into the details in a second, but he was like, how is war still legal? I can't believe war is still legal. Think about how we condemn violence on the regular, but we're like, yeah, but that's different to
That's
bomb
war.
people.
Come on.
It's
It's the
such a
whole
good
point.
point. All right. So, investigators were combing through the background, according to the Associated Press, the AP. They were trying to determine any motive for the attack, including whether it had anything to do with Shapiro's politics or his Jewish faith, which it's good that they separated the two. Okay. So it turns out, according to NPR, Cody Balmer is who did this. He called 911 himself at 2:50 a.m. Sunday morning, 50 minutes after the fire, and said that Shapiro should know that Balmer, quote, will not take part in his plans for what he wants to do to the Palestinian people. Balmer said he'd had friends killed, according to police. That's who told NPR. And he also said, our people have been put through too much by that monster. All he has is a banquet hall to clean up, which is interesting. So he burned the banquet room and the piano room, which, think about that. Like, what is, I don't think about what extravagance the governor's mansion has. But having a piano room to burn, a banquet hall to burn in your home when people can hardly afford food and rent and healthcare and they're living in the streets and then they're doing drugs and then they're getting into terrible accidents and then they're getting put in jail and prison where they're sent to do labor for cents a day. Like, it just feels crazy to read the words, his dining room and his piano room burned.
Yeah, it's nuts, and I just think it's another sign of the political times. I'm not wading into what endorsing or not any of these actions here. I just think this is another instance of you see absolutely unimaginable violence inflicted on the Palestinian people being done in our names with our tax dollars and with the completely disgusting and unnecessary theater by our politicians, definitely bipartisan, um, tripping over themselves to go and sign bombs that are, falling on kids, children, uh, in Gaza. And, when you do that, when you go over and autograph bombs that are being used in a genocide right now, it's a big country with a lot of people, and they take certain actions, so I think this is another sign of our times, right? And we all kind of live in an equation, and if you're feeding a bunch of politicians signing bombs that are going to tear apart children into one half of the equation, then the thing that comes out at the other end are actions like this. That's not taking a position on whether or not they should happen and the merits of those actions. I think it's a reflection of actions and reactions.
Yeah, well said. It's a weird situation. I don't know if we're going to get more coverage or details on it. I think that this is one of those situations that no one got hurt, and so the media is going to move on and the news cycle is going to move on, because the last thing they want to do is bring attention to the cause of Palestinian liberation.
Yep.
We want to talk about the candidates, something hopeful, right?
Let's
Some
get
good
into the
candidates have announced.
politics and the
Yeah,
candidates.
candidates, politics. Good guys running for the US Senate
We like to
in the
see it.
Midwest, the beautiful Midwest, where I now live, my new home. Uh, I don't think it's a coincidence that I moved to the Midwest and we start having banger candidates. I would like to take credit for all of it. All
That's
right,
one of
just
those
kidding.
correlation causation things I think might be a factor.
um, okay, Nathan Sage has announced in Iowa, where I live, that he will be running for Joni Ernst's seat. We're going to play you his launch video. And for our listeners, the audio is good too. Now, I met Nathan. We went down and had a chat when I found out he was running. I found out through Dan Osborne, who ran for Senate as an independent and outperformed every other Democrat running in a statewide race this past election. He ran on standing up to corporations, standing up to monopolies, working people having their fair shake because they built this country, which is a message that Nathan also understands and has and gets. He grew up working class, and I felt the same way when I first met Dan, that I was like, this guy gets it. He reminds me of my father. Like, there are so many people I've met who are progressive politicians that claim to be from a working class background, but if you talk to them, I don't know, it doesn't feel like it. And so Nathan and Dan, it felt like it. And he knows what it's like to put Christmas on a credit card. He had parents that wrote bounce checks. He thought his only future was working in a factory. And that really resonates, that in America, we're always told if you work hard and you're honest and you do the right thing, you'll do well. And it's not really how it feels for the working class. It feels like you're going to be stuck in this town forever and you've got to do crazy things to get out. And for Nathan, that was joining the military. And he still believed in this country. It wasn't like he did this out of desperation and had no hope. Like he believes in the promise of America. He hasn't given up yet. And so he went and he served, and that's how he saw he would be able to have a better life. And that's insane, that that's what working people have to do, is literally risk their life to fight wars that the ends are not something that they believe in, that the US government is getting us into to protect the richest guy's capital in their stake somewhere abroad. And so I think he represents a lot of what's wrong with this country, and he would be a shot at real representation, which I really appreciate. So we got a good one.
We got one in there jumping in as a Democrat, Nathan Sage. I have, we both have some Iowa political experience. And I was looking at the Iowa Senate race coming up in 2026. Joni Ernst is the incumbent, and as terrible as they come. And I was reading, using my Iowa lens to look at these tea leaves, and I was thinking to myself, man, the Dan Osborne model, run in Iowa, a close by state that is a little bit less red than Nebraska. This would be a prime opportunity to use the Dan Osborne success to run an independent in Iowa against Joni Ernst. And I was really hoping that was happening because it's important to remember just what kind of success Dan Osborne had as a working class individual who ran as an independent, where a Democrat did not run in a very red state. So, to put it all in context, there were 33 Senate races in 2024, and in 30 of them, Democrats underperformed the last Democrat who ran in that state. In every battleground state, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, Nevada, Arizona, Michigan, Democrats were down across the board compared to the last Democrat who ran statewide in that race. The best any Democrat did in those 33 races was break even, and the worst was underperforming by 7 points. It was a terrible election cycle. Obviously, we got Donald Trump. But across the board, in these lower races, Democrats were underperforming, except for one candidate, Dan Osborne in Nebraska. He was a union guy. He ran independent. He overperformed the last Democrat that ran in that state by 8.5 points. So compare him to literally 33 other races. The best performance was just breaking even. Here Dan Osborne is running as an independent, overperforming in a year where there was not a lot of bright spots by 8.5 points. It was the biggest overperformance in the country by a mile. And he was a working class guy who ran on a working class agenda. And I was looking at Iowa and a candidate like Nathan Sage to copy that playbook. Nathan Sage is, cut from the same cloth as Osborne is, working class guy, working class agenda. But here's a little bit of what I think happened there. Instead of clearing the lane for a guy like that to run as an independent, like they did in Nebraska, Iowa Democrats started teasing insider candidates with big names, with elite resumes, like Zach Walz. That's a known quantity in Iowa. He's been hanging out on the bench. He's a fan of. He's the leadership of the party. Corporate leadership is definitely looking at a guy like that, thinking that he's going to run. And he was reportedly considering jumping in. And so Sage ended up jumping into this race as a Democrat. So I look at that and think, just like that, we got the chance to run this Osborne playbook, and it's gone. It's off the table in Iowa, where it might have worked, being a little less red than Nebraska. And to me, I was really hoping that we would get a shot to see that work in a state where it had a much better chance of succeeding. But because you have kind of corporate Democrats, connected Democrats to the core leadership of this party threatening to jump in and run, it's drawing these candidates who are from working class backgrounds with that agenda and kind of forcing them to run as Democrats and taking that model off the table before it really even gets a start. And to me, that is one of the first cases after the 2024 election where you could see this party start to do what it always does, which is shoot itself in the foot. We saw what worked. We walked away from it. To me, it's another classic installment of, snatching defeat from the jaws of victory. So while Nathan Sage, I really like how this guy looks. I like where he comes from. I was really hoping personally to see him copy that Osborne model. I don't know if that was ever a consideration, but the ingredients seem to be there. I wish him all the luck running as a Democrat, but I don't want to see the party, take away the chances for success before they even get off the ground. That was one note that I had on this.
Yeah, and there was that race recently where they were like down to counting the ballots and everyone was watching. They're like, oh, Democrat won in Iowa. See, Democrats aren't dead. We can win in the middle of the country. And it's all of these coastal elite Democrat darlings talking about this who have no idea what life is like in the Midwest, in the South, in rural America. And it's so frustrating to see that. Um, because so many people, I bet, who are DC Democrats are going to say, well, Nathan Sage doesn't seem like the rest of the Democrats. And I think most people would say that's a good thing, that he's not like other Democrats, that he's a different kind of Democrat, in that he's not representing the corporatist party, which is what the Democrats have done. John put this really well in a recent podcast talking about the divide of like Republicans really representing the oligarchy, especially Trump's Republican Party, and Democrats really fighting for stability in the stock market, a safe place for doing business for corporations because they work there and their friends work there and they have money in the stock market. So they want that stability. They want those steady returns. That's what they fight for. That's what they get donations or lobbying money to fight for. And then the oligarchs, Trump's people with more money than God, are causing crashes in the stock market just because they can buy low and sell high when it's high in a few days and make tens of millions of dollars within the span of a week. And so this is really who you have at the helm of either party. And we will get to see in Iowa very clearly what people want the future of the Democratic Party to be. This primary is going to be very telling. We're going to see now it's already at the national level. I saw the TikTok announcement for Nathan had 150,000 likes. People have their
It's
eyes
awesome.
on this. Will a run of the mill Democrat win, or will a Democrat that is running on a working class agenda to stand up to the corporatist party be the one that wins? Because how people who are traditional Democrats feel to me, because they're fighting for the corporations, they feel like middle managers. That's the energy they have. I'll also say they have the vibe of like a Harry Potter loving kid, which is something I said to John earlier when we were talking about what we would talk about on the show today. But I really believe that to be true. And so we're going to keep our eyes on that race. It's going to be a big one.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. And I think strategy looks it's a big country with a lot of different situations state by state. There are parts of the country where the Democratic Party is very much alive, and running primaries is the way to figure out what kind of Democrat we want running in the general election. And I think it makes sense to do that if Democrats in the general election um, have a chance of competing on a playing field that has been made very uneven and very skewed by both parties towards whoever has the most money. And for a while, Democrats thought that, hey, we're not going to play with one hand tied behind our back. We're going to accept all the corporate money. We're going to try to compete with Republicans on that. Um, and there are states where you can run a primary and still have a competitive election, but in a state like Iowa, it is right on the cusp because it used to be competitive and democratic, kind of like Ohio. Ohio used to be a swing state, and it's been on this red trajectory to the point now where it's really not competitive for general election Democrats. And Iowa is right there. We've had a couple of statewide candidates run as Democrats that are pulling, 43 and 45% in the general. So I look at a state like Iowa and I look at the mood of the electorate, clearly fed up with the Democratic Party that has historically low ratings right now. I look at a candidate who has success like Dan Osborne, just completely getting rid of the party and running on his working class background in a state much redder than Iowa, um, and getting close. And to me, that says this is the perfect model, Iowa, to run that again. And what I worry about is when you get these candidates that have really great backgrounds, like Nathan Sage, you are attaching a toxic brand to a candidate that otherwise is bringing a lot to the table. Even if he gets out of this primary, which is going to be hard to do, especially if you got corporate Democrats bringing their connections to Chuck Schumer and the donor class into the primary. We all know how those connections work. Once you get out of it, you have to deal with a party brand that's really beyond your control. So that is why I worry about this model of running candidates. I hope Nathan Sage can, not be drugged down by the terrible Democratic brand that's been trashed by people, trying to cater to corporations. People don't like that, it turns out.
Okay, I want to say, for those of our listeners who are not aware, why Iowa is an important state politically. Iowa is the primary state for Democrats. So it's not that Iowans hate the Democratic Party because they don't believe in labor rights, or they don't believe in a higher minimum wage, or they don't believe in breaking up big corporations. It's none of the stuff that I see get assigned to the state when people are talking about it, who don't know what they're talking about, quite frankly. Imagine being in the state where the first primary is. So Democrats flood Iowa with canvassers, with political ads, with rallies and speeches, because it's the first state that holds a primary contest, the Iowa caucuses. They hear all of the promises for from these politicians, and they hear it over and over and over again. So when Democrats repeatedly come here and promise all of these things, these populist policies, they remember them when they end up getting elected and come into power and don't do those things. So this is a state where people uniquely remember all of those promises because they're told them hundreds of times over. They're inundated with canvassers and speeches and coverage and pushed ads. And so you might think of Iowa as like, what is it, Idaho? Is it Ohio? I don't know what state that is. It's a flyover state. This state, the people here probably remember the full campaign agenda of candidates more than people in any other state if they run as Democrats, because they're the first contest. So the hate of the Democratic Party in Iowa is coming from actually like a very informed place, which is interesting.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's a hilarious quality that Iowans have. I remember being on the Warren campaign back there and scheduling candidate time, which Iowa's unique because it's the only place where these really high up figures, senators, people running for president, have to interact like in living rooms because of the structure of the caucuses with ordinary people. I think there are a lot of things about the caucus that, were not as accessible, was not as representative. But one of the things it really did was force people in very high up places to come down and meet people where they were. And I remember, calling literally a husband and wife and saying, "Hey, Elizabeth Warren wants to come to your house and meet with like 10 people." And they were like, we're kind of busy. We're kind of busy and like none of this time works. It's a state with a very intense political culture, and they do have a long memory, and it comes from a place of being informed because of that.
Yeah. Though a reason to not vote for a candidate is they never came to my town. And that's like a real thing you'll hear in Iowa. They like expect you to come. And if you don't come, that's enough. They're going to vote among the ones who did come to their small town. It's amazing.
You're out of here. We got more candidates, Jessica. Who else is announcing?
Abdul Al-Sayed, who is a doctor, who has spoken a lot about healthcare. So
we need one of those,
candidate. Huh? Yep. He has a pretty interesting ad. I don't know if you could just hear my boyfriend blowing his nose super loud in the background.
Bless you.
Sounded great. Okay, let's play this ad from Abdul, and then John, I want to hear your take.
An all-American story. Public schools, high school football captain, scooped ice cream, loved his Camaro, lacrosse at U of M, an academic scholarship to med school, Michigan values, and a life of service to Michigan. His name? Abdul El-Sayed.
I know. It's a name built for American politics. My name is Abdul El-Sayed. I'm running for U.S. Senate because in the state that built the American dream, it shouldn't be this hard just to get by.
To pay our bills, or afford our groceries, or see our doctors, or get our politicians in D.C. to give a damn about us.
Michigan made my dreams possible. I grew up all American here. became a doctor to help people, and spent my career making government deliver for us. I took on politicians and rebuilt Detroit's health department, got glasses for thousands of kids, helped young moms, and took on corporate polluters and led in our schools. Then I ran the state's largest health department, where we built big things, model programs for veteran services and to protect our kids.
Dr. El Sayed named Public Official of the Year.
Cancels medical debt for thousands of Michiganders.
And yeah, I'm a bro with a podcast
To dig into the epidemics America's facing.
of economic and health insecurity and the political system that holds us back. Here in Michigan, anything should be possible.
We need a little bit more of that Michigan grit and values in Washington. We've got to fight back hard against Trump and Musk with a hell of a lot more than paper paddles and broken promises. They're not the disease, they're just the worst symptom. The disease is the corruption of our politics by billionaires and corporations.
While the workers who built this country are forgotten.
They've left us with trade deals that have rotted out our towns and robbed our children of their dreams. Students are being snatched off the streets while our democracy crumbles.
And the politicians don't do anything. That's what's un-American. Here in Michigan, we build.
So let's build a bold vision of a government that works for all of us, for healthcare, housing, an economy that includes all of us.
My name might be different, but our fight is one and the same. And it's as American as it gets. I'm Dr. Abdul Al-Sayed, and I'm running for U.S. Senate. Let's go.
Okay, so that was the first run through of an ad. This is my introduction to this person. I understand that as he said in the ad, he's a bro with a podcast. What I like about this so far is that in an introductory ad, he has taken an anti-billionaire stance. I think that is the floor for today's politics. He called out the ICE snatching, the masked agents, unidentified, that we've all seen just kind of show up out of nowhere and start taking people. We need folks who are willing to put that in their ads and center that in their messaging. And we got a call out of, Democrats, performative protest with the little signs that they're holding up. I like that about this guy's introduction into the political scene. I think what I would want to see from candidates like this, and any candidate, are you going to brawl for national health care? Again, this is something to me that just isn't up for debate at this stage in the game. We started with that debate, in 2016, where Bernie really put it front and center. There has been a lot of water under the bridge since 2016, and simply there is no reason why we should not be running on a platform of national health care right now. That is one of the central messages of the Bernie and AOC rallies that are bringing out all kinds of people from across the political spectrum. And what he says makes sense, right? There's no reason why the richest country on earth should not be able to provide healthcare that every other nation manages to provide for their people. And now, to bring it back to the top of the show, I forgot the point that I was going to make when I was talking about the Parkersburg dirt track. But a Trump supporter in Parkersburg, West Virginia, I'm interviewing them about his first 100 days. We get into a discussion of healthcare, and she brings up the very good point that Cuba, one of the poorest countries on earth, by our policy, by the way, is able to provide phenomenal healthcare, and their citizens are outliving our own. Okay, so that's what I'm looking for in these candidates. What I want to see from this guy is that. Is he going to center antitrust policy like we were talking about at the top of the show to continue the work of people like Lena Khan, to put some meat on the bones of his initial call out of billionaires and the companies that they run? Are these folks going to, not only talk about saving Social Security, but jacking it up? I mean, doubling it for all I care. We are a country that is fully capable of providing pensions to people. So is that going to show up in there? I want to see from this guy and other candidates, unions front and center, and the PRO Act, making sure that working people have the tools to assert democracy in their government, but in their workplace. Are we going to center that? What I see so far is pretty good, but those are kind of the checkpoints that I hold up against anybody who's throwing their hat in the ring right now. What about you, Jessica? How did it land with you?
I think it's interesting he took the approach of starting, and if you haven't seen it visually, it's like old cartoons. Like when did TV become a thing? Like the 50s. It's like 50s cartoons, and it's all about his history and who he is and his background. And then they say like his name is Abdul Al Sayed, and one of the radio shows in Michigan said, "Great candidate, unfortunate name." And it's just crazy that the post 9/11 Islamophobia in America, that a name like this, it immediately makes you have to address it on the front of running. Um,
Tell that to Barack Hussein Obama, baby.
yeah.
Run
So
that
I
back.
thought that was really interesting, but I think he's a good candidate. He's been involved in a lot of the Michigan-based nonprofit grassroots organizing groups. He's always had their support, which is a huge indicator for me that you're a good dude. Like Zoran running for mayor, he
Zoran.
was organizing with the cab drivers. When Bloomberg tried to make the price of a taxi medallion $1 million, he went on a hunger strike. Literally, a guy running for mayor when he was an assemblyman went on a hunger strike with the cab drivers. So if you're like on the ground in the trenches with working people, like doing the hard work to fight and make people in power uncomfortable for those wins, those are the people that I think do a good job serving us in Congress. They live the fight.
And this is another good example going back to our conversation about Iowa and the different strategies going forward here. You know, you hear Bernie saying that you don't need to be loyal to the Democratic Party right now. Just run however is going to make you win. Okay, Michigan is a state where Democrats are competitive in general elections. So this is a state where I'm going to look to the Democratic primary to see the people jumping in with that long track record of standing with the working class in the battles that they choose before they choose to run for office. If you're running as a Democrat and you're bringing that to a primary, that makes sense in a state like Michigan. Let's see that happen there. And in states where the party is not competitive, let's see those same people get rid of the toxic brand and run as independents. This can happen in many different ways. The point is that we get people from the rank and file, the people who have actually lived working class problems and are running on an agenda to solve them.
And meanwhile, while we're all on the ground here on Earth fighting for healthcare and food and trying to buy eggs, people are going to space.
Baby, you're a firework. So I can do that, right?
Katy Perry belongs to a celebrity culture that no longer exists. The
Yeah.
world has moved, and Katy Perry has stood firm in like 2011. I
Yeah.
watch her and I don't understand, John. What is happening with Katy Perry? She cannot read the room.
Yeah, I think once you get past a certain level of wealth and influence, you are just impervious. You just become self-awareness blasts off into space even further uh, than you can make it strapped to the top of one of Jeff Bezos' rockets. And that's really how that whole segment landed for me. What was it when they got back down to Earth? It was like, this is for the benefit of all people on Earth. Like, I'm sorry, how did a group full of like morning talk show hosts and celebrities being blasted into space help us at all with the very real and advancing problems that we are facing here on the ground? I am not so sure. Have you said anything about those problems? Did you blast off into space and perhaps broadcast your opinions about any of these very real problems on Earth down to the people who are still on the ground? I don't know, but it didn't seem like that. And it seems kind of like a really tone deaf PR move. And I'm curious to see if that like actually pays off. You know, maybe I'm in such a bubble that this stuff still actually works for a population of people. I just can't imagine who that population is.
I don't think we can underestimate how important it is politically This is going to sound like I'm joking, but I'm being so serious. It is very important that the certified baddies are on our side. Who am I talking about? Certified baddies. These are women who are known for being hot. Okay? Olivia Munn,
Baddies.
Emily Ratajkowski.
Baddie.
After this happened, they both, Olivia Munn on some like talk show was like, I'm sorry, but like people down here are struggling and you're going to space. Like, who does this help? Emily Ratajkowski was like, I'm honestly disgusted by this. Why are you guys going to space? This is absurd. And so there is an important divide in our culture among the celebrities that are willing to uphold the ruling class agenda and the celebrities that are actually like, women of the people, if you will. They get it. They're in the culture. They're
The
they're not
baddies.
they're not serving the ruling class. They're there for us. And we have to give them all of the attention, the celebrities that choose to make the right decisions, because I think it matters. I think seeing that like certified baddies are criticizing the space trip, people will be like, huh, is it cool to hate on the billionaires? You know what I mean? Like incels online will be like, oh, maybe I could
Oh,
impress the pretty girl by being mean to the billionaires. And it's like, yes, you can. Yes.
such a key calculation to happen. If a revolution tips off, I think it will be because people, make that realization that in fact, the way to raise your dating value is to decouple yourself from billionaires and actually be mean to them. Is it so hard? I think not.
All right, we're going to save AI for our next episode. We're going to talk about Harvard, who,
Harvard. How you like them apples?
yeah, I'm a I'm a proud I took one class at Harvard.
Hey.
It was on punishment and imprisonment philosophy in
Oh,
their
shit.
their graduate program. It was an intense class, but really crazy place, Harvard. And it's seen as like, it's not ever like, sometimes there are some subjects where it's like ranked the top, but it's weird that like you'll see Stanford being at the top for certain things and like other Ivy Leagues. But in our brains, Harvard is still like, I don't know if you do this or I just grew up in the Northeast, but it's like the college. You're like, oh, he went to Harvard. It's like the most prestigious one still. Do you feel like that?
I do. Yeah, I feel like that's permeated our culture and kind of had some, sticking value. And, just to flash my own elite pedigree, as a person who went to Cornell, an institution universally mocked in our pop culture with figures like Andy Bernard, yeah, I feel the sting of Harvard's prestige very, very much in my own personal life.
Yeah. Yeah, as someone who went to Brown and we're like, yeah, we're like an hour and a half away, but we're seen as like the stupid hippie free love. Oh, you can take your class pass fail. It's like within the Ivy League, it's seen as like the weird hippie camp.
Don't worry, Jessica. A lot of people that fucked up the world went to Harvard.
Yeah. I know that. If you walk through the halls of the Harvard Kennedy School, it's like war criminals office,
Whoa.
war
Yeah.
criminals office, war criminals office. And it's like, Jesus, I just want to visit Stephen Walt. Like, why are you guys all here? Like, I'm going to get drone struck on my way in.
It's the hallway of war
Wretched
criminals.
place.
But that's not why they're in the news. Why are they in the news lately?
They're in the news lately because finally they've decided to stand up to the Trump administration when a lot of colleges, Columbia is one of the ones that's been in the news so much, where you have like members of Congress pressuring Columbia to release students' interdisciplinary records. It's just crazy, violations of privacy and free speech and all of these things. College is supposed to be a place where you can explore ideas and challenge your perspective of the world. Not in Columbia, no. And it's weird because like your tuition money goes to a lot of these huge endowments that are then invested, and sometimes they're invested in like Lockheed Martin and shit. And if you're a student and you don't believe in what Lockheed Martin's up to, and you don't believe what Israel's up to, and you don't want your money going to that, it makes sense to protest the school that you're a student at. Like, hey, I don't really like how you're using my money. I thought it was going to go towards my fucking education. And I think that's very important to be able to say that to your college. And so there's all kinds of problems with free speech at these universities that have come up over the last couple months. But Harvard is one that has decided to not capitulate to the Trump administration. Some other colleges have followed suit. And I think it's because of Harvard's prestige. It means a lot that they were first here, but colleges like I think it was Wesleyan and a couple others have said, we're with you, Harvard. We're not going to do whatever the Trump administration says.
Yeah, and if you're a student who is standing up and saying, "I don't like that the money that I pour into this university that is supposed to be a place of free thought, academic, um, freedom to pursue any topic," if you're saying, "Don't use my money to put into these companies that uh, perpetrate war all over the place," you expect your institution to stand behind your right to protest and criticize it. That's the whole point of academic freedom. And why this is important is because when the Trump administration started putting pressure on these universities, of course, over the protests on campus of speaking up for Palestinian rights, one of the things that Columbia caved on, was restructuring its Middle East Studies department, and making concessions that might seem small, like banning face masks during protests. But ultimately, that fits into exposing your students to this security state as they stand up and use their free speech to advocate for Palestinian rights. So that's one of the, the Trump administration comes in here and says, we're going to freeze your, millions of dollars in grants that are going to your institution unless you ban face masks at these protests and expose these students to being identified by the security state so we can send ICE agents to deport them like Mahmoud Khalil. Those are demands that were caved into by Columbia and that we saw Harvard stand up to. This administration came in there saying that billions of dollars going to Harvard through federal grants were going to be frozen, that it might lose its tax exempt status. And despite being threatened with those consequences, it didn't capitulate to the administration, which, for as fast as things have gone in an authoritarian direction, it's nice to finally see an institution with the weight of Harvard stand up to that. But I will say that should be the norm, not the exception. These are much more than places where you go sit down and crack open your notebook. Harvard has an endowment that puts it in comparison to some of the world, a large corporation, right? That's kind of what these big academic institutions have turned into. And it's time to start throwing that weight around in defense of all of the things that are core principles to a place like Harvard or to any university.
Hell yeah.
Hell yeah.
All right. Now, John,
Yep.
we have a special guest. We've talked to Jose Olivares. I'm going to read some of his bio so you know who you're getting. He's my colleague at Dropsite News, first and foremost, but also in general, an investigative journalist. He's also an audio producer. He reports on immigration enforcement, U.S. operations in Latin America, and human rights. Previously, he was at The Intercept. He's done some award-winning reporting, which has revealed wrongdoing, mismanagement, and abuses of power by state actors and private companies. You get the vibe. He's been published by national and international news organizations. Some of his reporting has led to congressional inquiries and policy change. He's a heavy hitter. He's based in Brooklyn, but he was born in Mexico City. And he knows his stuff. We're really excited that he's who we have here to break down what's happening in El Salvador and the Bukele-Trump bromance.
Chew on that, JJ Nation. And until next time.
Bye. right, so we're really excited to have Jose Olivares here. He is in, I shouldn't say where you are. What if they come for you?
That's a
Everyone's
good question.
afraid that this administration is coming for them because, whatever, we talk about that poem a lot. They came for this, they came for X, but I wasn't X, and so on. For this week, the world's been rocked by some photos of what happens when they come for you. We've all seen photos of this prison in El Salvador, and I've told friends and family about it, and I keep getting this reaction of I don't even want to see it. And other people who have seen it and are just horrified. It really feels like we're gonna see these photos in like social studies, history textbooks for decades and centuries about what went terribly wrong during this administration. So sorry to open this up on such a low note, Jose, but you've been following this for so long. What's your reaction now seeing what things look like inside this facility?
Yeah, well, thanks so much for having me on. I mean, I think what's important to note here, and you'll hear this a lot when you speak with like human rights attorneys and folks working in human rights in El Salvador who have been kind of denouncing and calling out human rights abuses in El Salvador since the 2002 state of exception, is that this prison in particular, it's called the Secot, it's a terrorism confinement center. And this is the prison where all of these immigrants that were sent from the U.S. Under this expulsion with the Alien Enemies Act, all these immigrants, they were sent to this facility, the Secot, to be detained there. But I think what's important to note about this facility is that this is essentially Bukele's PR facility. This is the facility that he wants to show off to the world. This is the one that he wants to demonstrate, I'm a strong, I'm a cool, the world's coolest dictator, as he calls himself. But this is what he wants to kind of flex his muscles and show he's, this law and order president. However, because this is the PR prison, this is the one that all the journalists get to visit, all these influencers get to visit, all these politicians from all over the world get to visit it. But what we don't see are the other prisons, these other maximum security, massive prisons in the rest of the country in El Salvador, where horrific human rights abuses have allegedly taken place there. Deaths have taken place in the other facilities, but those are just never really shared with the world because of how awful the conditions are. And so what we're seeing is we're actually seeing a very sanitized image of the reality of Bukele's carceral state in El Salvador. And I think it's important to note that this is where the immigrants that were expelled from the U.S. have been taken. This is where we think they still might be. We don't know if they've been moved around. We really don't know. We don't have much or really any information from the Bukele Salvadoran government. But it's quite shocking to see how folks are being detained and how folks were sort of expelled to this country. Just a little bit of the basics of what the facilities actually look like. It's a bunch of cells, and each cell has the capacity to hold dozens upon dozens of men. And the way that they are held, you'll see in the images, they're practically shirtless, wearing these white shorts. Their heads and faces are completely shaved. And if you think of like when you go to the grocery stores, the different aisles, the little like the tiered kind of shelving units, that's exactly kind of where people are sleeping, how they sleep. They get rice and beans, and that's pretty much it. No sort of protein. The fluorescent lights are on all day and all night, and they only get practically 30 minutes outside of these individual cells. So the conditions are pretty horrible, and this is where a bunch of immigrants that the Trump administration has deemed to be terrorists were sent. Now, in the past few weeks, we've been seeing more and more reports about the validity of whether any of these people were either, criminals or were terrorists. Regardless, I think there should still be due process, and they shouldn't be expelled to these prisons. So, regardless if they were some awful people or awful criminals or whatever, that doesn't matter. There should still be some sort of due process before any action like this takes place, right? But we've seen these reports of people being sent to this prison, sent to this facility to be held under the custody of the Bukele administration. And we're seeing how there was a hairdresser and makeup artist who, was taken there. And now we're seeing how kind of politicians are really agitating related to the specific case of this Maryland father, this Salvadoran father from Maryland, who was also expelled to this facility. We saw the Supreme Court order 9-0. They decided, they ruled that the Trump administration's rendition of this particular Maryland father was illegal. That's the exact word that they use in their order. And they instructed the Trump administration to facilitate his removal from Bukele's terrorism Secot prison. But again, now we're seeing the Trump administration defy these judicial orders. We're seeing them go against not just federal judges in D.C. or appellate courts, but now even the Supreme Courts. And we saw this really strange exchange with Bukele within the Oval Office with the media, in which Bukele said, it's not my responsibility anymore. And they're kind of ping-ponging back and forth, not really taking responsibility of who should be the one in charge of returning this Maryland father, which can hopefully, open the door to allowing other immigrants who were wrongfully sent to this prison to also be returned.
Yeah, it's all so insane. We have that senator from Maryland going down there now. I don't know what that's going to do, but it's good someone on the other side is going to this facility. But it seems that this is a part or just the first step of a larger plan for the Trump administration, because at first it was kind of a hot mic situation that we heard him talking to Bukele in the Oval Office saying, soon we're going to go for the homegrown ones. And it seems that they're treating prisoners as some kind of slave labor commodity to be traded with other countries. And I can't do any Star Wars references because I'm still holding out that John's going to watch it and I don't want to spoil it, but it's really giving evil empire. I'm just curious what you make of that comment of we're going to go for the homegrown ones.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's it's very interesting, and it's kind of it's a very logical next step, right? For the Trump administration. We've seen this heightened enforcement. These arrests of people throughout the U.S. who did have some sort of legal status, right? I mean, I think the folks who were expelled were there. They were either seeking asylum, or maybe they were set to be deported, but they were expelled to this prison. But we've also seen the Trump administration take a very aggressive approach to people who have green cards. The case of Mahmoud Khalil, the Columbia student, is one of the first examples of the Trump administration going after people who do have a sort of legal status in the U.S., but who are being sought out and being arrested due to their political speech. And so I think it is the next step. And I think what's very troubling is just the way that the criminal justice system works in the United States. It's extremely flawed. So who exactly is going to determine who gets to be sent to these facilities? We have some very I would say pretty scary people working behind the scenes to make this happen. We're seeing some reports, Politico reported that they seem to suggest that the negotiations to begin sending people to this prison in El Salvador actually started before the November elections took place last year. They started in August with Eric Prince. Eric Prince, as we know, was the founder of Blackwater, right? This U.S. military contracting company and mercenary group. They were, accused of human rights abuses back during the Iraq War and of the Nisor Square massacre. And so we see Eric Prince going to El Salvador last August. He meets with Bukele. He has this meeting. They kind of published this weird PR video when that takes place. But I think that's kind of when the idea was first hatched for the Trump administration to start sending immigrants to these Salvadoran prisons. Trump then gets elected in November. After Trump comes into office, Secretary of State Marco Rubio and other Trump administration officials, they seal this deal with the Bukele government. Essentially, the Trump administration is going to pay Bukele $6 million to start housing and detaining these immigrants in these prisons. We also saw how the State Department has now given El Salvador a level 1 travel advisory, which means it's one of the safest countries that U.S. citizens can go travel and visit. And we're also seeing how global entry has now been given to citizens of El Salvador from Customs and Border Protection. So we're seeing these tiny little gifts that are being given to El Salvador as a thank you allowing them to use these prisons to detain immigrants. What's really interesting though is some of the other behind the scenes negotiations that we kind of know a little bit about, but we don't quite fully know too well what happened, because again the Trump administration is invoking the state secrets privilege and saying that these are high level national security negotiations, so a lot of the information we can't really know too much about it, so it's quite a dramatic step that we're seeing when it comes to just the really heavy-handed kind of right-wing attacks on immigrants and working class people in general.
I really feel like Dick Cheney walked so this gang full of Batman villains could run with all of this right now. And I have been kind of crashing out over this news because I feel like just everybody out there, all of our listeners, the general public at large, should really update themselves onto how fast this is advancing. We've interviewed people on this podcast like Steven Donziger before who have talked about how the security state apparatus post 9/11, the Patriot Act, the long arm of the United States government that was developed for counterterrorism efforts, is really being turned back, on an increasingly, moving towards domestic citizens, anybody really, at this point. And I want to get into, you had a recent article in Dropsite News. The headline was "The Secret Bukele Deal Lies Behind Trump's El Salvador Deportations. Trump asked the Supreme Court Friday to lift the ban on renditions to Bukele's torture chambers." The article gets into a little bit of the political theater that is at play. And I kind of want to give you a chance to draw back the curtain on everything that's happening here. The article goes into detail about a federal indictment of an MS-13 leader who was involved in secret negotiations between the gang and Bukele's government. Can you talk about, Bukele's strongman image versus the reality here? How much of this anti-gang crusade that also Donald Trump is wrapped up in, how much of this is theater?
Yeah, I mean, it's an excellent question, and I think it's important to kind of go back into history a little bit and kind of get a little bit of context of this. So in 2019, Bukele administration officials were quietly entering Salvadoran prisons to negotiate with the top leadership of MS-13. Right, the top leadership, they're known as the Ranfla Nacional, and they're considered to be the board of directors of the gang. Right, it's kind of how the Justice Department calls them. They're the board of directors of the gang. And so Bukele administration officials were entering the prisons and negotiating with this board of directors. And this was revealed a couple of years ago by Salvadoran news organizations. And essentially what happened is as part of the deal, MS-13, they essentially were given certain territorial benefits, like they were allowed to kind of keep some of their territories. They were also, some of the leadership, some of the leaders were very secretly, quietly released from some of the prisons. But in exchange, Bukele essentially had MS-13 reduce the amount of violence that was taking place in El Salvador, reduce the number of murders, so that the Bukele administration can kind of have this public image of how his government was responsible for reducing the violence in El Salvador. But what's most troubling is, as part of this deal, MS-13 received some of these benefits, but MS-13 also was required, and they had to mobilize their forces to support Bukele's political party in the 2021 legislative elections. Now, this is huge because this is kind of a very kind of blatant act of corruption, right? Of getting a criminal gang to mobilize your forces to vote for your political party. That's quite significant. And in 2021, Bukele's party wins overwhelmingly during these legislative elections. This is how Bukele is kind of able to consolidate power even further within the Salvadoran government. But then a year later, the deal falls through, right? The pact falls apart. And so that year is when Bukele sort of goes on the offensive against the gangs in El Salvador. He has this state of exception, right, where he deploys the armed forces, he deploys security forces throughout the country, just arresting thousands upon thousands of people in El Salvador, builds the secot, builds some of these prisons, and starts filling people with these prisons just kind of as a show of force, as part of the state of exception, to kind of attack the gang. Now, the troubling thing for Bukele is that you have this image of the strong man who's going against the gangs, but at the same time, there's a history in 2019 of leveraging and negotiating and working with the gang for his own political benefit. And that information is extremely embarrassing for the Bukele administration. Any release of that information could be pretty bad for him. And so in the years that followed after the state of exception, he wanted to essentially get these MS-13 leaders who participated in these negotiations and wanted to keep them in El Salvador. There's one case that was reported on by El Faro, the Salvadoran news organization, in which Bukele administration officials, they wanted to pay a Mexican cartel $1 million to kidnap one of these top MS-13 guys and bring him back to El Salvador, right? It was interesting because then what happens is we see the Biden's Justice Department, they have two separate indictments in the Eastern District of New York. The Eastern District of New York, they're the courts, they're the ones that handle the El Chapo case. They handle some like big time organized crime cases. And they have two separate indictments against the Ranfla Nacional, against the board of directors of MS-13. And in these documents, in the indictments, they specifically mention the corruption deals, the negotiations that took place between the Bukele administration and these MS-13 leaders. But with these indictments, the U.S. government asked time and time again for El Salvador to extradite a number of these MS-13 leaders so that they could face justice in the Eastern District of New York in the federal courts. But time and time again, Bukele's administration outright refused to extradite any of these MS-13 leaders, right? Why? Well, they're worried that once MS-13 leaders reach the U.S., they might flip and become cooperating witnesses, or something during their trial or something during the legal process might be revealed about these negotiations that took place in 2019. And there was also rumors that potentially the U.S. Justice Department might seek specific indictments against top levels of top leaders within the Bukele administration for their participation in the 2019 corruption deal, right? And so what we've seen now, what we saw days before Trump signed the Alien and Enemies Act on March 11th, is there was one man in particular who was a member of the Ranfla Nacional. He was found in Mexico, right? He was released after the 2019 deal. He was released from prison in El Salvador. Somehow he made his way into Mexico. Mexican security forces arrested him and expelled him to the U.S. They handed him over to the U.S. government. The U.S. government starts doing the process. They start going, carrying out the legal process against him. His name is Cesar Humberto López Larios, aka, his alias is known, Greñas, right? Greñas is going through the process, but 4 days before Trump signs the Alien Enemies Act, before he invokes it, Greñas' case, his charges are all dismissed. They're all dismissed by the Justice Department. There's a very specific document from the Justice Department talking about how they are going to dismiss all his charges due to sensitive negotiations with the government of El Salvador. And then on March 15th, what we see when we see this kind of handover, this expulsion of these immigrants to El Salvador, in the footage, in the video, one of the main people who was being, his face is being shaved, that is Greñas, right? So we see this we can kind of read between the lines, and we can go, okay, well, this was likely maybe part, a negotiating chip from between the Trump administration and Bukele. Trump could have, potentially the Trump administration could have said, here's this top MS-13 leader, we're going to dismiss all charges. Now he won't speak about your corruption case in a U.S. federal court. You're welcome. Thanks for letting us use your prisons as well, right? There are still 8 of these top MS-13 leaders in U.S. custody who may have played an even bigger role in the 2019 negotiations. but those might continue to be used as bargaining chips by the Trump administration for further negotiations with Bukele. But what we just don't know exactly what's going to happen. It was a very interesting case to kind of see how this man in particular, this top MS-13 leader, was expelled alongside all these other immigrants in response to these sensitive, high-level national security conversations between both governments.
This is a dumb clarifying point. When you said board of directors, which board of directors? I'm imagining an MS-13 board of directors, like a boardroom of some of the hardest motherfuckers you've ever seen. Like The Wire season 4, when it's like Stringer with a conference room of gangsters. What was the board of directors, Jose?
Yeah. I mean, that's exactly kind of how the Justice Department portrays them, right? I mean, the majority of these guys were leading from within Salvadoran prisons, right? But because they were able to negotiate these deals, they had these huge concessions, right? And this board of directors, they've had in the past, they had negotiated with the Salvadoran government. They struck a deal in 2012. But as part of that deal, this board of directors, which the majority of them were in prisons in El Salvador, they were able to get concessions like sex workers to come into the prison and things like that. But yeah, I mean, these are like 40-something, 50-something-year-old men. From the gang. MS-13 is a relatively young organization, right? It was created in California, kind of by Salvadoran immigrants, and a lot of these people, these board of directors, who were original founders of the gang in California. But now these guys are in their 40s and their 50s. They're the highest ranking kind of guys, and they're the ones that are kind of giving out orders for the rest of the gang. And that's kind of how it's portrayed. The reality of it, I think, is a little bit messier, right? I mean, I think it's not as solid or of a structure of a leadership, this gang, and no criminal group really is. I think that's kind of like a false thing that sometimes we sometimes try to think about when it comes to cartels or criminal groups. They're not, strictly hierarchical organizations that are really well structured and organized. But these guys are considered to be the leaders of MS-13, and they did carry a lot of weight when it came to decision making, both in El Salvador and Central America, and also in the U.S.
I'm wondering, how does everything that you just talked about, how does this story square with both Trump and Bukele's image as strongmen and their narrative of delivering and enforcing law and order?
Yeah, I mean, I think this kind of story reveals that there is a lot more going on behind the scenes than we might know, right? I mean, Trump and Bukele are both kind of seen as these strong men, and a lot of their actions, I think, would suggest that they do hold a lot of power, and they're doing things that are could be quite scary for a lot of us. But I think we were seeing also a lot of similarities between both presidents, right? For example, in 2022, when Bukele had his state of exception, there were, human rights organizations that were coming out and publicly saying there's no due process, right? Bukele is completely trampling on due process rights. He's just arresting and picking people off of the street. There is human rights abuses taking place at these facilities, at these jails, and just absolutely no semblance of due process is being followed here, as Bukele tries to kind of consolidate his power and put all these people in prison. And now we're seeing a very similar thing from the Trump administration, right? We're seeing all these arrests taking place. We see the Trump administration illegally sending people to El Salvador, to these prisons. We're seeing Trump use Guantanamo, right, to detain immigrants as well. And so we're seeing these kinds of different actions take place with a lack of due process in a way that kind of parallels what is happening with Bukele.
It's really, really hairy and incredible stuff here. I'm wondering, just wrapping up your commentary here, we've talked about a lot today, but what is one key takeaway that you want our listeners to think about as they're following this story unfold?
Yeah, I mean, I think what's interesting here to note is that there's a long history kind of leading up to this, right? I think kind of we were talking earlier about how Cheney could walk so that Trump could run, and I think that's very much true. And I don't think we would be here if it also wasn't for the Democrats, right? I mean, I think we can also point to the Democratic Party and say, you guys are also partially responsible for this, right? If they wouldn't have run such a terrible campaign last year, if they wouldn't have run such a terrible campaign in 2016, we wouldn't have this problem, right? If they would have actually addressed just things that people were demanding, and the immigrants' right movements were demanding, what working people were demanding, what Palestinian and anti-genocide activists were demanding this entire time, we may not be where we are today, right? However, I think all these administrations leading up to what we're seeing today, the Bush administration with the creation of the Department of Homeland Security, the creation of ICE, the use and of these agencies by Obama, how they were continued to be used by Trump, by Biden, and now today. I mean, I think there's a straight line that we can kind of trace and kind of point responsibility and point the finger at each one of these administrations that took place before today, essentially kind of setting up the next administration to engage in further and further attacks on our rights. And I think it's important to keep in mind that, yes, of course, we need to continue to criticize the Trump administration for this, but I think we also need to recognize that the Democratic Party, essentially the Biden administration set up this entire situation to happen for Trump to kind of take it and run. So I think that's kind of something that is important to note, that we can't forget history, right? We can't forget even recent history within the past 4, 8, 10 25 years since Bush took office. And so I think it's important to really kind of keep that in mind when we organize and do any sort of advocacy, that there is a long trend of history here, and that both political parties are to blame for this.
Yeah, it's really striking to see the bipartisan explosion of the security state, targeted towards counterterrorism measures that are now being directed back at us with people like Sebastian Gorka, the counterterrorism czar now, who I'm sure is imagining all kinds of ways to, slap the terrorist label on people doing things domestically. How about just briefly, could you talk about the level of concern that you have given that reality?
On a personal level, or just kind of just in general?
Yeah, just a personal level. I mean, I've been sitting here taking this all in and kind of crashing out. Is that a valid thing to be doing right now with people like Seb Gorka at the helm of counterterrorism operations and with vast resources at his disposal?
Yeah, I mean, I think what's interesting is that obviously it is a very scary moment in history, but I think also what's interesting to note is that there are pockets of resistance against this that are organizing against this, and for me that drives me with a lot of optimism. Personally, I think it's important to recognize that this isn't going to last forever, right? This is everything is temporary. Everything goes through its ebbs and flows. It's a dialectical process, I guess, if we're going to use Marxist terms. But I think what's interesting to note is that even though we're seeing a lot of this, like these really heavy-handed security tactics, being used by the Trump administration, we're also seeing a lot of people organize and mobilize in response to these attacks. We're seeing people really kind of be politicized in a way that I think is important, that maybe we hadn't seen since the Bernie phenomenon, almost 10 years ago. And we're seeing people kind of really mobilize and go, something is wrong with, not just what's happening with the Trump administration, but with the entire system in general. It's time to organize. It's time to mobilize. And so that, for me, even though we are living in scary moments in history, I think that personally is what drives me with a sense of optimism, is seeing people organize and start to kind of gather their forces to try to present any sort of challenge to what is happening. And so, yeah, that's kind of like where I'm at right now. I'm curious to see what's going to happen. We're only 3 months in, 4 months in to 3 months in, right? Since 4 months in since the Trump administration.
But
Yeah,
it might
so
be 3
I mean,
years, maybe a decade.
exactly, right. So I'm curious to see what's going to happen with the Trump administration. But I think people who are organizing, even also within the government, we're seeing an increase of leaks and sources providing information about certain operations that are taking place. I think that is kind of also very symbolic and kind of shows us exactly where regular working class people and the immigrants' right movement and all these people are where they're heading and where their head is at. And so, yeah, that kind of fills me with some optimism going forward.
Well, thanks for saying that. It fills me with optimism as well. Jose Olivares, thank you for joining us on the show. You do great work. Where can people find that great work that you do?
Oh, Thank you so much. So I'm a freelance investigative journalist. So I write for various publications. I write for The Guardian. I write for Dropsite News. You can find me on X, formerly known as Twitter. Jose Olivares is my last name. My handle is JLOSC, the number 9. Yeah, really appreciate you having me on. Thanks so much. It's a weird time in history, so yeah, really appreciate being able to talk about these topics.
Thanks so much for coming on the pod.